Welcome everyone to the Infoshare on the NIS2 Directive and the other new security regulations from the European Union. My name is Moens. I'm cybersecurity lead from GÉANT, and I'll be presenting to you together with Edith Herczog, my colleague, and Edith is EU liaison officer at GÉANT, and she has very strong contacts with everything that's going on in the EU, so she will be telling us on the latest state of affairs of these directives. Welcome to all representatives from NRENs, and I've seen in the registration list that there are also representatives from universities. Welcome as well. A lot of these things might be oriented to research and education networks, but they are evenly important for universities. We will discuss that and we'll get to that today. Yes, the NIS2 Directive. The NIS2 Directive is, has had a predecessor. A couple of years ago, there was the NIS Directive that was aimed at critical infrastructures. And a lot of infrastructures were touched on that, regulations about making sure that critical infrastructures kept available, but research and education, duck the bullet, wasn't covered with that. When evaluating the NIS Directive, the European Union found that not everything that was essential for keeping society afloat was covered enough with that NIS Directive, and they started working on more directives for making sure that all essential infrastructure is available for society. And that was mentioned in the Security Union, and in that Security Union, research and education will also be covered. There will be no place to hide. It will as far as we can judge now, it will cover all of us. This is what we want to do in the next almost hour and a half. I'll give you an introduction to the Security Union and especially the NIS2 Directive, what it means. Edith will tell you more about the complete landscape of the security directives and the latest state of affairs and what we can expect in terms of time. When will we have to do what? There will be a call for action for you, and we will hear from some NRENs, and I'll invite you to let us hear how you are preparing for these directives, and we'll have some a discussion at the end for looking how we can work together or what you might or might not need. Some things to ask you. Please mute your microphone unless you need to speak, of course. And if you have any questions, you can raise them in the chat or raise your hands, and Magda will have a look and monitor what is going on. Now, let's dive into that NIS2 Directive and the Security Union. The Security Union is a complete ecosystem of directives, regulations, organizations, and it's really quite impressive what the EU has started up. There's, well, you could almost say there's something to pick and choose for everyone. But unfortunately, it's not only pick and choose, and it's also mandatory for a number of sectors, especially everything that has to do with critical infrastructure. Last week, there was the cybersecurity conference that was part of the Slovenian presidency of the European Union. And in that cybersecurity conference, there were a number of quotes from people from the discussions I want to share with you. One of the things that they said is that cyber crisis now is a reality at a national level. You see that the cyber attacks that are happening at infrastructure, like the Colonial Pipeline in the United States, but also at, for example, healthcare. A lot of hospitals have been hit. That is becoming a problem at a national level. very specific kind of attacks, advanced persistent threat attacks. That is when someone is very persistent in trying to get access to your data or your equipment. The EU CERT mentions that kind of attacks is growing exponentially. They have seen 1 or 2 in 2018. This year, until August alone, they have seen 14 of these very sophisticated attacks. And these are the kind of attacks we also see targeted at our research institutes. There was a call from NATO, very specific, to share intelligence as much as possible. You can look at it from different angles, but I think that is a very good call, a very strong call. From Germany, there came a statement from the director of the BSI that when they were implementing NIS, so the predecessor, the NIS touched 4,500 organizations in Germany. NIS2 will touch 10 times as much organizations. And it will be a challenge to make that manageable, everything that is concerned with it. And the manageability is both on the implementation side, but also in the overview side. Now, looking at these regulations, there are a number of new regulations, and these new regulations are they will cover everything that has to do with keeping society afloat. And there are special regulations which are aimed at the digital side of the society, and there are regulations that are aimed at the non-digital side of society. Edith will go more into that, and we'll see what that means for us, and that's what the call for action also is for. The security union that I mentioned is the security strategy from the EU that will run for 5 years, and part of that is the all new directives. What we are looking at, the NIS2 Directive, it's a directive, and I now and again compare it a little bit to GDPR directive, especially the way that it's announced and is implemented. It will be a directive on EU level. That means that once it's finalized at EU level, that member states need to implement it themselves, and that they can make choices in implementing it themselves. Strange message on my screen, but I'll continue. That means that it will take quite some time, and that on a national level, a member state level, there can be made specific choices. What is interesting for research and education is that certain research areas are mentioned specifically in the security union. That's everything that has to do with health, with Earth observation, and with security research. And not surprisingly, I think. For good measures, everything will be shared that we show you. This session is recorded, so you can look it back, or you can point colleagues to it, and the slides will be on the wiki, or are already on the wiki. Now, the NIS2 Directive. Let me explain a little bit what that is. What is that NIS2 Directive? The NIS2 Directive is a regulation to enforce the implementation of adequate security measures for information systems, and for information systems that society depends upon. So it's not for your personal registration of your collection of antique cars. No, it's for something that society depends upon on a day-to-day basis. So it's meant for all organizations that are vital or important to keep society afloat. That's not the bakery at the corner of your street, but it is the water company, the energy company, the ISP. Now, this directive is aimed to broaden the scope of the previous directive and make it more explicit. Research and education is intentionally included, but it's not specifically mentioned. However, The directive has been under discussion and a lot of input has been given. And one of the amendments that has been given recently is that there was an amendment to suggest that universities and research institutions should be explicitly mentioned in the annex. I'll get to the difference between research and education networks, NRENs, and universities in a minute, what difference they, how they are differently treated in the NIS2 directive. The NIS2 directive will have impact on your security. You will have to comply with international security standards, and you'll have to show compliance. That means that there will be some form of auditing and there will be some form of supervision. There will be a national supervising body, compared with the GDPR, where you have a national authority on privacy. And that body, supervising body, will also have the power to enforce compliance. Whether that would be through sanctioning or other means, that's not clear yet, and unfortunately probably will be subject to national implementation. But you could also expect that there would be some peer reviewing or external auditing. If we look at the timing, roughly, that's a floating subject. What we expected was that about end 2022, the final text would be in Parliament for sanctioning, and the implementation would start, and member states would have two years of implementation. What at the current moment is the timeline that Edith will go into a little later. Now, if you look at the scope of the NIS2 directive identifies two kinds of organizations that are covered in the scope. You're either an essential organization or an important organization. For both kinds of organizations, the standards are implied. The standards that you have to comply to are specified, but there are some distinctions between them. If you are a government agency, and in some countries NRENs are specifically a government agency any government agency will be in scope, because EU regulations think that all government agencies are essential to keep society afloat, and I think I agree to that, or else that government agency would not have an reason for existence. Certain specific digital activities are mentioned in the directive. If you are a registry of a top-level domain, so the .nl or the .lu or the .be or the .it, if you're a registry of a top-level domain, then you are definitely within scope. DNS service providers are definitely within scope. There was initially a definition where everyone who runs an authoritative DNS was within scope, but that has been weakened a little bit, so that if you run a DNS yourself at your place, you will not be in scope if you're on a private DNS service. Several cloud and trust services will be in scope. So it's a very broad range of activities, and what also is very interesting, and that is why NRENs are covered, is if you as an entity, as an organization are critical because of a specific importance, because of a specific rule. If you look at an NREN, the specific rule is that you supply network connectivity and services to a very specific part, an essential part of the society. That makes NRENs, in our view, an essential entity in the scope of the NIS2 directive. Now, what will be the impact of that NIS2 directive? What will that mean for GÉANT? What will that mean for NRENs? What will that mean for universities? There will be standards. International security standards that you will have to comply with. And that standards will probably be based on, the well-known standards from NIST and from ISO, from BSI. And there is a little catch in that, and it is that on a national level in member states, there will be a national body that will decide what standards you will need to comply with. We do hope that there will be some coordination on that we will have just one set of standards in the European Union, but that's not described, that's not prescribed in the directive. There will be standards, there will be oversight, essential entities. That's the difference between essential and important entities. Essential entities will have to show compliance with the standards, and they will have to report to the supervising body. Perhaps there are certifications needed. I think if you look at the standards, if you're now already working, for example, with the BSI standard or the ISO standards and working and are very close to certification, or perhaps you're already certified with a part of your activities, then you're already pretty much covered. But not that much of our organizations are. Explicitly mentioned is that you'll need to have risk management and show that you have identified risks and that you manage them. There is a strong chapter on information sharing and the obligation to report incidents. That's already in existing legislation, but that is more explicit and for everyone that is covered in the NIS2 Directive. That doesn't mean that each and every incident you need to report, but there will be some obligations there, some serious obligations. Now, yeah, some pitfalls. As already mentioned, this and the same we have seen with the GDPR. There is national implementation. The directive will be set up on, it will be an EU directive, and that means that member states will need to implement it within 2 years into legislation. That will be the national implementation, and there are a number of things that member states can make choices. Some of the choices are the choice of standards, the way supervision is covered, and the scope. Whether you're covered in the NIS2 Directive as an essential entity or an important entity will be decided on a national level. There will be a national authority that will appoint who will be covered by this directive. That probably, if you look at the figures which I mentioned before, if Germany thinks that, estimates that there will be 45,000 organizations covered by the NIS, they will not be covered individually. They'll probably be covered by sector. So all universities or all energy companies. Yes. Well, the national standards, that's something that really worries me. If we have different standards and we need to work together internationally. And the other thing that is still a point for research is how it will work for transnational organizations. A university is mostly working and hosted in one country, but some organizations are cross borders. Some research organizations are cross borders. Organizations like BRACE and EGI, organizations like GÉANT, they are cross border. So that will be something interesting to see how that will work out in this assignments, and who will be the supervising and who will be the national body that will assign it. The other part is that it's about large numbers. Large numbers of organizations are covered with this directive, and we already see that there are huge discussions. Every word in the proposed directive has been discussed, is under discussion. And they'll probably work it out, but that's what the magic that's happening in Brussels. And I think Edith can tell more about it because she's very experienced, been very close to this kind of work. But that's something we will not know what exactly the NIS2 directive will mean for us until the end, until the text is final. But if you go back to the intention why the European Union wants this NIS2 directive, because they want more and more organizations covered by be assigned as critical infrastructure, a part of critical infrastructure. That means that, well, we cannot escape. Now, one of the subjects I want to highlight out of it is that resilience is mentioned explicitly in the directive. So if you look at critical infrastructure, then you want critical infrastructure that's essential for keeping society afloat. You want to have it available at all times, no matter what happens. And here resilience comes into view, into action. Resilience means that you're being able to withstand small and major incidents, that you're able to recover quickly from a serious crisis. Resilience means that you have thought about how you can recover, that you have thought about being able to withstand the failure of a server, the failure of a network connection. I think we are doing pretty good with that already, but it will be an important part of the directive. Now, there are also interesting opportunities for NRENs in these directives. Because in the directive, it's mentioned that there are a number of organizations, bodies to be appointed on a national level. There will be a national competence center which has security expertise. That's for, in some countries, that's an excellent opportunity for an NREN to step in. There will be a national coordination center. And when you're one of those centers, it's interesting or when you're interested in your country to be one of those centers, it's interesting to apply for that or to make sure you're involved in the discussions, because it will give you funding and continuity. So in some countries there already are national cybersecurity centers that will probably be the logical organization for this kind of bodies. But there are a number of countries where the security expertise isn't that widely spread, isn't that much available, and there are clearly opportunities for NRENs to step in that. The other opportunities for us as a community is to make sure we prepare jointly. And we prepare jointly for looking at those standards. And there are a number of tools available already that you can use. We are developing best practices, and we have a very interesting baseline that you can use for if you want to check where you are already. If you're interested, please contact me and we can discuss that a little more. And other things to prepare jointly, if you look at the resilience, we have experience with cyber crisis management, incident response, and you're very welcome to join us in the annual crisis management event in December, the CLOR event. As I said, the regulation is a very large framework of all kinds of directives, and all kinds of small and large things are involved in that. We already touched a little bit upon the DNS, but there is some special discussion has been going on about information sharing, and in combination of this regulation with GDPR in the information in the incident response community, there have been quite some discussions whether you would be able to share information about threats, about attacks or not. Our colleague from JISC, Andrew Cormack, well recognized as a good writer, did a write-up on the legal framework for C-certs sharing information. I can highly recommend this. It shows you how GDPR and NIS2 Directive helps in covering this and making this making a good legal framework under this for sharing. With this, I will hand over to Edith for looking at the current state of affairs and going into the other regulations that are part of the Security Union. Edith, you take over.
You are muted, Edith.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to ask Magda or Alf to continue with the slides because I don't have access to it. Yeah, so thanks very much, Magda, to move it. Again, I'd like to come back to the original. Yeah, I'd like to come back to the original slide of Alf, just to mention to you that security became so important issue that even the union is deserved for certain items and certain issues were not under. Lately, we created in the border of the European treaties, the banking union and the energy union, and now there is the aim to create a security union. Why? Because it seems that union as a whole is capable only to build the necessary measures to save the continent from the outside threat. So it's a very much a geopolitical issue, and it's an ongoing issue for the next couple of years, but it will be part also of the Future of Europe conference and any future modification of the treaty. Probably these unions, the energy union, the banking union, and the security union will be more reinforced. Having said this, the major competence within the European Union stays with the European External Action Service, so it shows that how geopolitical it is. And with the shared competency with DG Connect mostly, dealing, of course, with the digital part of it. But on the resilience side, it's far more connected to the other infrastructures like the energy, like others, we are seeing it later. Yeah, so there are a lot of dimensions, and it's already highlight the risk that once one word is entering to one part of the legislation, it's easily filtering to the other legislations or vis-a-vis, and therefore a lot of things are interconnected. It's difficult to follow. We can move to the next slide. Because what I'd like to highlight today is another very important directive was published actually on the same day like the NIS2 Directive, which is called a SER Directive. Formerly was known as a ECI, European Critical Infrastructure Directive. Now the new name is SER, which is Critical Entities Resilience Directive. Why it is important for you and why it is important for everyone. Why the NIS Directive covers the cyber threats, the Critical Entities Resilience Directive covers the physical threats, and originally the original ECI directive covered the electricity and the transport mostly. Yeah, so it was electricity and transport. Now it comes with all the physical infrastructures. And because the digital infrastructure also has the physical infrastructure part, and it can create the hybrid threat. The threat can come through the cyber attack, attacking the digital part of the system, and can come in the physical form of attack, targeting the physical, I don't know, the pipelines, yeah, the digital cables, the routers, or any equipment. So it's a physical infrastructure. It is something which is equipment or optical cable or whatsoever, but it's a physical infrastructure. It's not the same like the NIS Directive. Why it is important and why it is so crucial that we discuss it today? Because the two directives were only published on the same date, 16th of December 2020, but they have a common annexes and they have the interface between the two directives, especially to deal with the hybrid threats. And the hybrid threat, in that meaning of the hybrid, means the cyber attack and the physical attack together. And time to time, it's very difficult to separate because the physical attack, of course, will impact the cyber or other way around. So I try to put here all the sectors which are included to the said directive. As I said in the past, it was only the electricity, the energy sector and the transport. Yeah. Now it covers the industry. It covers all kinds of energy, of course. It covers the telecommunication. It covers the transport, meaning the rail, the roads, the bridges, the water network, the water pipeline, the optical cables, etc., etc. So everything which is above the surface, or even the underground, like the metro or the optical cable, which are digged under the grass or under the ground, and includes, of course, the planes and the satellites. Yeah, just everything which has a physical infrastructure part. Yeah. To make it a bit more complex, on the upper side you see the blue and the two blue and the green boxes. So the electricity regulation, the DORA, and the electric communication code. These are sectoral legislations which also have a security element and the cyber element. And maybe just the electricity speaks for itself. The electronic communication code, we know that it's a digital single market, so it's very much for the digital single market players. DORA, probably it's less known. DORA stands for the Digital Operational Resilience of the Financial Markets. So it's very much about the finance. And then, of course, there is some interconnection with the EIDAS directive and with the GDPR. Yeah, so they have also security elements, but they are on the upper underneath. Yeah. So this is the connection between the two, and we can move to the next slide, when I can explain it a bit more. What does it mean in the real terms? Can we go to the next slide, Magda, please?
It's Alf. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Alf. Very shortly, we discuss it now. These are the names of the two directives. We are in the middle of the co-legislator work. So the Parliament is working on it. The Council is working on it. There are hundreds and hundreds of amendments for both directives, actually. And because it's not yet finalized, I decided to introduce you the original proposal because the final rules are progressing. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So what is the terminology? I think that if you understand this terminology, it's a critical. So under the NIS directive, we have two different entities, as Alf described it, and I'm so thankful that I can work with Alf on this, because of course for the technical issues he is the expert and I'm just a politician or a political mind. So the NIS directive differentiates two kind of entities. One is the important entities, which means an entity of type prepared as an important entity in the Annex 2. Yeah, so Annex is important. And the essential entity means the entity which is mentioned as an essential entity in Annex 1. And under the SER, we have two kind of entities. One is the essential entity, which means the same like under the NIS2 directive. And we have the critical entity, which is a physical infrastructure. Yeah, so this is without the NIS2 part. Yeah, and what we have to be careful as NRENs and GÉANT, that we try to remain under the NIS2 directive, even if we are listed under the said directive, because the requirements what you have to comply with are very different for the three different kind of entities. We can move to the next one. So here I try to put it to the context, and I made the color red for those where GÉANT and the NRENs have some interest. So GÉANT and the NRENs regarding the essential Annex 1, which is the common annex for NIS2 directive and the SER directive, so it's absolutely the same. We are placed into the essential, but with the condition that the member states have to list the entity as a critical entity, but we have to comply only with the NIS directive. While if you would be in the first group, then you have to comply with both the SER and the NIS2 directive requirements. So it's a crucial difference, critical difference between the two. And if you are recognized as a digital infrastructure, then you have to comply only with the NIS2, even you are listed as a critical infrastructure or as essential infrastructure in the said directive annexes. And I say it especially for some of the NRENs where the member state choice can be, or should be, or will be listed under the public administration. So if you are under the public administration, then you have not to comply only with the NIS2 directive, but also with the very restrictive requirements of the SER directive in the future. While we have the other kind of entities in the listed as a critical one, and these are the postal, the waste management, the manufacturing, the food production, etc. But they are listed as a critical infrastructure, and it's less important. This is not important so much for GÉANT, but it will be important for the education and research, because these are the amendments put the education and research into the important. Sorry, it's not really nice because it's essential, critical, and the down cube is an important entity. So this is the third kind of entities where only the NIS directive applies. Yeah, we can, and so for GÉANT, if you are here and you are covered with the NIS directive already, then what you have to do, you have to upgrade yourself to the NIS2, but that's it. If you are up to the left up, then it's very difficult. And if you are down, which we are not, but the education will be, then it's much easier requirements for them to fulfill. Yeah. We can go further, please. So I will not stop here because it's too detailed, but you have the access to the presentation, therefore everyone can, of course, look at it later. What is important, that the directives differentiate not only the essential, critical, and important entities, but also the essential services. Yeah, so you can be a critical infrastructure with essential services, or you can be a critical infrastructure with the non-essential services. And it's quite complex. I try to put here the articles which describe it. But what I suggest for all the NRENs and all the universities and whoever listened to this presentation, that on one side you look which kind of entity you are in the annexes, and on the other side you look your services, that which kind of services and how they are classified within the regulation. Both are important. Yeah, thank you. We can go to the next page. So here is the SER steps, the SER directives. So if you are an essential service under Annex 348, then you are a critical entity on which the service relies. You have to be listed, and the NIS applies. If you are an essential service but not under Annex 3, 4, and 8, then you are a critical entity on which the service relies. You are listed, and NIS and the SER applies, both applies. Yeah, and for GÉANT and the NRENs, as it is today, we are fortunately under the blue-green part, so we have to be listed, but only NIS applies for us. If we are not registered as in the annex as a public administration, which then changed the rules, as I said. Yeah, so we can move to the next slide, please. What are the major issues among the legislators? I tried to put here some of the elements. Of course, the relation between the SER, NIS, other sectoral, DORA, electricity, all the different issues are running parallel in the parliament, and therefore, if whenever someone introduces the changes, then they all have to look through the entire system. And I listed here some of them, but I'd like to mention only the second from the bottom, that the submarine and the backbone under public electronic communication has to be more emphasized, and there are amendments to have a bit more special mention. So we are very much in the focus, and also the submarines which are outside of the European Union territory, maybe, but owned by the European Union. And what is important for us, for GÉANT, then as GÉANT has some elements of the infrastructure outside of the European Union, namely in the UK, we have to be carefully monitoring the future that what is the relation between the EU and the non-EU, having maybe a different rules. At the moment, the NIS directive applies both in the UK and in the EU, but of course it's a question what UK will do. As far as we understand from the discussions, UK will follow the NIS2 Directive requirements in its own legislation, and hopefully then it will kind of less problem for the future, but we monitor this. We can go down to the next slide. So I put here the timelines for the NIS2 and the third directive. They run parallel, but they can be divided in a certain moment. One can go faster, one can go slowly. I don't think so. I think that they will go in a twin procedure. You see that we are in the beginning. So the proposal was introduced December last year. The Council and the European Parliament discussed it in details. The Council is a bit more advanced with the NIS than with the SER regulation. In the case of NIS, they are already discussing the content. In the case of the SER directive, they are still discussing the scope, not the content, but the scope, that who has to be under and who shouldn't be under. And especially because, for instance, the public administration and the health sector, which is very much under the national competencies in the European treaties, of course, create a kind of additional discussions. So it will be quite a long discussion in my view, and my personal feelings, or my experience with the legislation, let's say, I do not see that they will be finished anytime soon. I do not see it before end of 2022. And I tried to look the French presidency program and the Czech presidency program. I couldn't, they do not really publish yet. Therefore, we don't have the clarity, but reading the documents which are available, I do not see them under the Czech or under the French president, or sorry, French is first, so under the French or under the Czech presidency as something to be finished. Therefore, my best estimate, but it's end of 2022. Then once it's adopted in the European Parliament and in the Council both, then enters into force 20 days after officially will be published in the European journal, official journal. I think that it will be very end of 2022 or 23, beginning of 23, or later, but not before. Then the national parliaments, as Alf rightly said, have the opportunity or have the obligation to discuss it in their national parliaments, and like in the case of any directives, they can choose some of the tools that how they wish to implement this directive, but they cannot choose and they cannot change the goal of the directives, and they have 18 months to do that from the entry in force in the official journal. And the legislation has to be fully applicable 2 years after the entry into force by the official journal. So be careful here, it's not 2 years after the national parliament decision, but 2 years after the publishing of the official journal. Can the process, how fast the process will be or how it can differ? I think that there are two major vectors, two major impacts which will influence the speed of the process. The complexity slowing the compromise, definitely, it seems that a lot of amendments, too many differences, too many diverging interests. But on the other side, we have the geopolitical threat, and it can be an accelerator. I cannot judge it at this stage, but I see these two major impacts potentially on the horizon. And I think that we get more clarity once the next trio presidency program will be published at the end of this year. The next trio presidency is France, Czech Republic, and Sweden. Sorry, there is a typo left. And as I said, I don't see it in the French papers. And I do not see it really in the Czech papers, because they are it's too early. So this is my best estimate anyway for the timelines. So the fully applicable for both directives will be the year 2025. And some NRENs already asked, are you under the SARE directive? I can definitely say that yes, you are under the SARE directive. Do you need to reply? Do you need to comply with the SARE directive? Not with the special requirements. You will be complying with the NIS2 directive under the SARE directive. Yeah, so if you do NIS2 perfectly, then everything is okay, but you will be listed in the SARE annexes as a critical infrastructure. No, not as a critical, as an essential infrastructure, sorry. Thank you. I hope it was clear, but if not, you ask questions. Thank you very much. I put some slides into the, these slides not to be discussed here, these slides as a kind of annex to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edith. And I learn every time I listen to you, I learn something new about these directives. It's very complicated matter, and it's from different angles. There was a question in the chat from Ilse Koning from SURF, and she asked, what is the definition of public administration? And the specific reason for that question is that she remembers that some time ago in the NIS2 it was stated that countries have to determine which organization get the legal cert task for a sector, so for a region. If an NREN would get that legal task, is appointed to be the cert for a sector, will that then make the NREN a public organization or not? I don't know whether you can elaborate on that. Please unmute, Edith. Edith, you're muted.
Yeah. So each regulation defines the definitions, and I can send to you the definition what the public administration in the sense of this directive would mean. Yeah, I do not wish to guess from my head. But what is true that the member states have a right to put by their choice the different organizations to this list. So the member state can decide when it's not very obvious that where they wish to put the given entity in their own country. Yeah, so some countries might choose to put it as a public administration. Some countries might choose to put it to the digital infrastructure. And I think that for you, it's much easier to fulfill only the NIS2 directive obligations. Yeah, so of course it would be your interest. But it very much depends on the physical infrastructure part you have. Because if the NREN runs the physical infrastructure itself, then of course it's very difficult to do not be under the SARE requirements regarding the physical threats. If you are a digital entity, but you don't necessarily own the critical infrastructure, then there is no reason why you should be there. For instance, if someone is running infrastructure which is managed by the telco sector, then the telco sector is responsible for this critical infrastructure. Yeah, so, but the member state has some freedom, and therefore, if it's a question or if there is a risk in the member states to be listed as a public administration, then it's maybe good for lobbying or to get them understand that the requirements could be very different for the two.
That's the call for action we discussed earlier, and that's what you need to do or need to be aware of, that you'll need to discuss some things with your national authorities. The idea is to make sure that we are digital, we are covered under the digital regulations, but it might be really difficult, as Edith was saying, if you own the fibers in your country that your network is running on, then it might be becoming a little difficult to just be under the digital part. I saw another question. Can you tell more on the status of the universities being drawn into the scope via an amendment on the NIS2? Is it a real chance, or whether it will succeed or not? Any ideas, Edith?
Yeah, look, it will very much depend. It will be a balancing act between the Parliament and the Council, of course. But I see that there is the very high risk that they will be under, and it will be very difficult. I see it very difficult to avoid. I see the forces, at least in the Parliament, because the Council is more closed room, so it's more difficult to know the news. But from the progress report of the Council and from the kind of noise of the Parliament, from different sources, I feel that it will be very difficult to exclude the universities. Especially because also there is a kind of convergence between the universities and the research. And the research is definitely a very high added value data. And therefore, I feel that it will be very difficult if it's possible to avoid that the universities will be registered as an important infrastructure. Yeah, so definitely not under the SER, under the NIS2, and with the very lightened requirements compared to the essential entities under the NIS2.
Yep. So we will know for sure by the end of next year, because then we know what will be in the annexes. But the way it will be implemented, so also the question that Mauro asked, if a critical infrastructure connects cross-border to a non-critical one, what would be that implementation? What would the implication be of that? That will be difficult to judge, because that will be under national scrutiny.
And moreover, there are other, so if you remember the opening page, that how many different legislations and actions and strategies are prepared. So the external borders of the European Union, the data Schengen, I call it. This is not in those directives. So we did not discuss the other directives and the other happenings happening at this stage, because I wanted to make sure that the critical infrastructure directive and the NIS directive understood that they are twinned. So it will be done and managed and controlled by the European External Service, kind of political agreement and connection with other countries too. Not in that paper.
Okay, thank you. Now I know that a number of NRENs have already looked into the NIS2 directive and have been thinking of what should we do. Let's get started a little bit to prepare. And you also might think, oh, it's not until 2025 until I need to comply with it. But we have learned our lessons from GDPR that it's never too early to start with preparations. And you can pause in between, of course. I'd like to invite some representatives from the NRENs to tell something about how they have been preparing, or what the ideas are for starting preparations. And Ilse, do you want to say something what you're doing in the Netherlands?
Yes. So here I am.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Actually, I cannot say a lot, but we have looked into the directive. I also was making an analysis, and then luckily I also got help from Alf, because GÉANT already did some, so I integrated both analysis. And yeah, we are, well, what we still have to do is look into the implications that it will really have on our operations, for example, and that's something we haven't done yet. We also have talked to the cooperative of the universities, and to some universities directly as well, because they also were looking into this. And we have to see who can take this up for the universities, because we don't have the capacity. Universities also have problems with finding capacity, and it's a really new topic also for the cooperatives. And yeah, I think there's more legislation to come on the digital topics, and yeah, we really have to find a way to deal with it. And I think that's something we are going to talk about the next few months also. So both on the process, how are we going to deal with this in the future, and also about the NIS2, for example. I wasn't aware of the share until today.
Yeah, it's yeah. It might not be impactful, but it could be. Ilse, did you also have contact with your government, with the ministries?
Yes, but they're not very helpful. They also have no idea, and the only question they asked us is, do you think you will be in scope for this legislation? And well, of course, I have an idea myself, but I actually want to hear the answer from them. How are they reading also these kinds of legislations, and what are their ideas also for the yeah, the national implementation, and they don't know, and we don't hear anything from them.
Yeah, they're probably only waiting. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and well, it's not so surprising, as I experienced myself, is that they go look for the organizations involved to ask more about how they are thinking about it.
Yeah, they had so I'm usually talking to the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, and they got a presentation from the Ministry of Justice. So I also asked our ministry, well, maybe you can organize something for the sector, and ask the same person to give this presentation, because he knows much more about it than anyone else. But even that they didn't do until now. So yeah, we are still searching also for more information, and in our organization also for more capacity to deal with it.
Okay, we'll get back to that, how we can deal with it by the end of this session. I'd now like to invite Ralf Groeper to say something about what they are doing in Germany.
Yeah, thanks, Alf. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share some of our insights. Actually, you asked me better not to prepare any slides, but I did. So, but it's only a handful. So I try to share my screen. So what's our perspective on NIS2? Well, first of all, maybe little insight in our current situation. So we already have national IT security legislations for around 5 years now, and we already are operating a critical infrastructure. Actually, it's specifically called critical infrastructure. What I just learned today is that critical infrastructure in the European legislation sense is something from SIR and not from NIS2. So I changed my slides a bit now to get the wording right, but I hope I didn't overlook anything. So yes, we have a critical infrastructure in the sense of the German IT security legislation, that is DFN-PKI. We have more than 10,000 server certificates currently valid. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, we have an obligation to report security incidents to the authorities, to the BSI that Alf already mentioned. Fortunately, we didn't have any of that significance yet. And the other thing is that we have to regularly present certification by a security standard customary for the sector, as I translated it from German. In our case, we provided our ETSI European norm 319-411/1 audit that we already had, which we already needed to be integrated in the major browsers. Also, of course, the eIDAS regulation is something that has to be considered here as a trust service provider. So yeah, we already had that. So that didn't change a lot for us. So that's where we are already operating critical infrastructures. On the other hand, we already have two parts of our organization that are already certified by BSI Grundschutz, which is based on ISO 27001. First of all, our mail support service, and on the other hand, our base IT server infrastructure, which we did. I won't go into detail because the time, of course, is not long enough here, but we didn't do this specifically because of the IT security legislations, but for other reasons. But of course, this is some kind of preparation for NIS2 and other things that might come in the future. So NIS2, are we scared? This is the first slide. Yes, don't worry. There will be another one that says no. Why are we scared? Too many open questions. Some of them had been answered today, but I think not all of them. So together we still have the task in front of us to answer all these questions. So I just took out 3 questions that I don't have answers to yet, which is an essential entity. What is it? Is it the whole organization? I think the start of NIS2 is worded in a way that it implies that the organization is essential, but later, especially in the appendices, it talks about defined services or infrastructure. So what exactly is the essential entity? Then, of course, which services will become essential from our point of view currently, which is the same as in the German existing regulation. Only publicly available networks are affected. So the network itself is probably not affected by NIS2. It says specifically available for the public there. But of course, it has been already mentioned, DNS is affected, and trust services, of course, still our DFN PKI, that is already covered. But what about the other trust services? AI is some kind of trust service. EDIROAM is a kind of trust service. And what specifically is the scope of the mentioned cloud services? I don't know. Then the time frame, I think Edith, you said quite a few things about the time frame, which more or less complies with what we have on the agenda. So I won't go into this at this point. So next slide. Are we scared? No, we are not. Why are we not scared? Well, on the one hand, we are kind of prepared to a certain degree. So we have experience from existing certifications, what I presented on the first slide. And an important thing for us is we have good working relations to the BSI, to the Federal Office for Information Security, which helps a lot. They can always be reasoned with if, I don't know, maybe we won't be able to be within a certain time frame. If you talk to them and say, we are on the way, we have a specific plan, usually it's really good to have a good working relationship with them because, yeah, you can achieve a lot when you're on good terms there, and they know who you are and they know why you are different than a commercial organization or different from a public entity or whatever. If they know that in advance, it will definitely help. Then we are expanding our information security services for our constituency in a lot of ways, especially we are currently in the pilot phase of our security operations center. Of course, we will use this capability also for ourselves. So if parts or the whole organization will become some kind of critical, essential or important or whatever entity, I think we are more and more well prepared to protect our services according to the state of the art. And another thing that will help is that we are harmonizing our network and server infrastructure for years. I mean, we have a quite large network backbone with dozens of sites where we have optical equipment or routers or whatever. And in the past, years ago, they used to be quite, everyone was more or less unique because of whatever reasons, and as part of our general maturing process, as I'd call it, we really made them much more comparable to each other. So if we do need to have to go into a certification and an audit scheme, the auditor can assess samples and the others are just more of the same. And if every site is unique, then an auditor would probably need to see all of them to check if they're all compliant. A few additional thoughts. One thing I'd like to mention is, it has been said earlier, I think by Edith and by Ralf, that you are being appointed as a whatever entity, critical, essential, important. That's not the way it worked here in Germany. You have to report yourself to the authorities as a critical entity. And if you don't, you risk a fine. So I'm not I think it would be nice if that would be different after NIS2 has been implemented in national law, but it's not the way our current IT security legislation works. So, and then next additional thought is the general direction for us is clear anyway. We will have to continue to formalize our information security processes. We have to be audited and probably certified to one or more different standards in more and more areas. This will come in our way. It's just not clear if it will be NIS2 or something that will be NIS3 or any national IT security law or any other legislation like GDPR that forces us indirectly maybe to do more certifications and do more formal approaches to information security, but it will come definitely. So we have to accept this challenge, and I think we should really openly accept this challenge and take it as a chance to improve ourselves, and not as like a legalese burden that is some annoying compliance exercise. So yeah, my advice for DFN and of course maybe for other NRENs is to really embrace this challenge. And the first point that I forgot is like the question, can or should we fight against becoming essential entities in a legal sense? And the answer for us is no. The acceptance and expectation from our constituency is that it is an important thing, and there is a need also for legislative measures to raise the bar of information security. And so my last slide and my last remark is, in the end of the day, we are already critical entities, critical not necessarily in the legal sense, but we are critical entities for academic and research sectors in Europe and in Germany, DFN, and that is regardless of any IT security legislations. And that is a true statement, I think, whether we like it or not. So we more or less have to live with it.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's it, yeah.
Thank you, Ralf, whether we like it or not. One additional question, perhaps. Are you involved with your universities on this, or planning to do something together for information sharing or helping them prepare?
Yeah, there's not something that is now specifically on track, but what we have in Germany is an organization that is also a non-profit organization that the computing centers of German universities use. And they, for instance, they defined a BSI Grundschutz profile specifically for universities, and we are cooperating with them, and we are on we have a close relationship with them. I think that they will probably also take on this topic, and together I think we will move forward here. But no, there's no specific current plans from DFN to advise universities or whatever in this topic.
Okay, thank you. I noticed some more remarks in the chat that some other NRENs and organizations are also working on, or have already achieved ISO certification. I know that Finland and Switzerland and Luxembourg, they are all working on this, and that might help and serve for part of their activities also as an ISO certification. IGISC has it, I believe. So that might already be quite a good preparation. Next, before we go into the last part of the session for discussion or for looking at what to do next, I'd like to hand over to Magda to ask us some questions, and it will involve you all, and we will do an online questionnaire with you. Magda, if you can take over.
Yes, just to check. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the Mentimeter, so please go to menti.com on your computer or phone. And the code is on top of the screen that you see. It's 96094065.
So unfortunately, there are also some no answers, so don't be afraid to say you haven't started yet, or have no plans yet. You're not the only one.
I see coming some comments in the chat. It's also a good way to comment on the slides.
Yeah, we'll save the chat for later. And okay, so out of the 19 people that have answered, the majority says yes, that they will be preparing. 5 have already started, and some I haven't started or don't know where to start, and there are some with no plans. We have a total, for reference, we have a total of 47 participants in the call. 20 have answered, but I can imagine that not everyone from GÉANT who's in the call will answer this. Shall we go to the next question now?
Yes. No. Yeah.
I think this is very good to see, although it will imply that we will have a lot of work to do. Yes, John, that's also a good choice. Wait on the advice from Andrew Cormack, but that will be specifically for JISC doing, and you are of course in a special situation there. Yeah, interesting. Prepare together with national peers. That means that there will be a lot of collaboration then going on in the different countries. Waiting for guidance from GÉANT. That means that this won't be the last Infoshare on this subject, and we'll continue with this. Yes. Thank you. We'll move on to the next. Okay, this is a little, yeah, most will want to work together in the preparation. Those are the answers I'd like to see. Some will wait, and I can imagine not everyone has equal resources to work together, and it's perfectly fine to wait for guidance and whatever. And well, no one will go their own way, or they won't tell us if they want to. But it's good to see that we want to cooperate in this, and that a number of you will want to actively contribute. I'll ask for your names later on. The last question, Magda. Thank you for your comments, Miriam. Okay, I'm sure that some people in the NREN community will be pleased to see that there is not an overwhelming request for another task force. Though, if we look at what would be very useful for you, that we do need to look at some kind of project or something, and the discussion group to work on this. More details, we will share more information on the wiki link. We'll try to share to set up a wiki link with pointers to relevant information. Cookbook guidance, that will be interesting to work on. And the slide disappeared. But the task, yes, thank you, great, Marco. Yeah. Benchmark, that will be, I think that's very interesting to see that so many organizations are interested in the status check or the benchmark. Feel free to contact me or Nicole Harris for more details on that, and we'll be on your doorstep next week. And Infoshares, yeah, that's a good point. We already might thought of that. That we will have regular Infoshares on this discussion, on this subject, and use those Infoshares to share the way that all the NRENs are approaching this. Miriam, if you contact me directly for access to wiki and etc., then we can work that out. We have some non-NREN, non-research and education participants in the audience, and Miriam from RIPE is one of them. Very nice to have you present.
Alf, may I ask one question from the audience, because I'm not sure that how many NRENs would fall under the said directive, how many NRENs that have a physical infrastructure, and do they need help with the said directive as well, or only with the NIS2? We have to be a bit, yeah. I'd like to understand a bit better what does it mean for the NRENs to engage with the both directives.
So the question would be if you own fibers or other infrastructure. So infrastructure, the NREN will typically own equipment, so network equipment, but that's not enough. I think you need to own fiber to be under the same. So that is the question. Maybe we can do that with. We haven't prepared that question. Just say in the chat. Maybe state in the chat if you own fiber. If you think you own fiber in your country, then we have an idea how many NRENs are covered with that part of the regulations. So we'll try to. We can probably look up in the GÉANT compendium how much that is for those NRENs that aren't participating in this Infoshare. At least Portugal has, yes. Magda, thank you for the Mentimeter for preparing, and we'll be sharing the results with you. Now we have a couple of minutes left for any additional questions or perhaps testimonials. Anyone who wants to share something. First come, first serve. We'll end this session at in 7 minutes exactly. So anyone wants to ask a question or wants to share some thoughts with us, feel free to step up. Yes, Christian.
Yeah, just a comment from our perspective. We are part of the NIS, of the original NIS, in the context of the Vienna Internet Exchange. So the same team which is responsible for the National Research Network ARCONET is also responsible for the Vienna Internet Exchange. And we are working on this one. So we have some good ideas how to prepare ourselves also in the ARCONET context without knowing the exact details of NIS2. But what we have learned so far is that NIS2, from the things you have to get audited or certified or whatever, will not be so much different from NIS. So whoever is wondering what NIS2 exactly might mean could get into looking at the current NIS regulation and find out what is demanded there. So for instance, in Austria, we have a so-called NIS fact sheet where specifically the various chapters of the NIS audits are compared to existing standards and give you some idea which standards you might follow to be as close as possible to the NIS demands. So we choose to, in most cases, follow ISO 27001 and this family of standards. But in some specific cases, the NIS audits are more practical oriented than ISO 27001 is. So just having an ISO certificate does not necessarily tick off all the problems, all the necessities you have with NIS or NIS2 in the future. And what we found out is it seems to be really important to set the scope for the specific service right. So in our case, as ARCONET, neither ARCONET nor the Vienna Internet Exchange is a legal entity on its own. We are operating under the umbrella of the University of Vienna. So of course it's a delicate question how much of the university will be directly affected by our NIS audit demands and NIS2 audit demands later on. So that's the interesting questions we have currently to find answers.
Thank you, Christian. If you could share a pointer to that fact sheet, that would be interesting. Even if it might be in German, that is still it's interesting for us to collect with our background information.
Yeah, I will do.
Thank you. Anyone else wants the floor? Check chats.
I have a question also.
Yes, Ilse.
Yeah, I was asking it already to DFN in a private question, but many NRENs have a different status or legal status. And in the NIS, so this is a question actually for the implementation later, but maybe important in this phase as well. So as I mentioned earlier, it's stated in the NIS that the government has to decide to give to give the legal task of a cert for the sector to an organization. And one of the questions I have for SURF, but I think it's a question for every NREN, is if you can get a legal task. And the reason why I'm looking into it is because we are a corporation, and I'm not sure if we as a corporation can get a task, a legal task, or if that's a conflict. And we are the CERT now, and I think we don't want to change it, but how are we going to deal with it? And is this an issue that we should look into also when this is formulated now in the legislation?
Yeah, interesting situation how that works with legal entities. Yes, will strongly depend. Probably it's good to monitor that. I don't know whether there is an answer yet. If there are examples of this in other sectors.
No, but if it's not possible for some NRENs, I guess this is an issue for how the legislation is formulated.
Yeah. Okay, it's a good question. We'll put that on the list for monitoring how the legislation develops. The last one. Who wants to read the last one? Questions or remarks? Once, twice, okay. Then I really like to thank you for your attention. We will be back with this subject, with Infoshares, of course, as soon as anything is more definitive with the legislation, with proposed legislation, but also a lot earlier with how we can prepare, how we will prepare. I'd like to thank Edith for the cooperation in preparing this session. I'd like to thank Ilse and Ralf for the time they spent in preparing and sharing their thoughts with us, just like Christian did. Thank you very much. You'll find this recording, the recording of this session will be available. And the slides will be available, and we'll start gathering background information on the wiki. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.